Welcome to another edition of the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. I'm Donald Grodoff, family coach with FamilyOCD.com and FocusedHealthyFamily.com. In the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast series, I delve into the hidden characteristics of OCD, anxiety, and anxiety disorders, the things that most people don't see, that are behind closed doors and shut within the mind about anxiety. My goal with these podcasts is to bring about awareness of Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, or OCD. Understand that I am not a doctor, therapist, or counselor, and the content, information, resources, and ideas that are talked about and brought up here in these podcasts are things that I have used, discovered, or have been recommended to me, and I always recommend to seek additional professional help in finding solutions for yourself. Thank you for listening and enjoy the podcast. This podcast was recorded January 2nd, 2020. This is podcast number 37, OCD and Goals. So, beginning of the new year, Happy New Year to you. And we've actually reached a pinnacle year, I believe, of 2020. And to me, what I'd like to be able to do, just as a goal by itself, is to actually not just take that as a year, but take that as our vision of 2020. Being able to have 2020 vision for our future, which is the best way to make goals. Now, just a real quick note off the top, not even related to OCD necessarily, but I just read something this morning about not writing, especially in legal documents, when you know how we go through and we write out a date, we put, like, for instance, March 3rd, 2019 would have been 3/20/19, 3/20/19. Well, I saw a post from a lawyer stating that you don't want to do that with legal documents now with 2020. You don't want to abbreviate it. For instance, if it was March 3rd, 2020, you don't want to put 3-20-20 because it can be altered and they can add into it 17, 19, so it could be 2010 and alter the document. So you want to always write out 2020 especially on legal documents, even probably checks and stuff. Just not that anybody would want to change the date, make it older on a check, but just a thought off the top of my head. But today what I wanted to talk about is goals. What to set up when you're dealing with OCD especially, or anxiety really too, could fit very well also. And really if you kind of look at how goals would be for this, the biggest goal of this for OCD is doing ERP, or exposure response prevention therapy, would be the ultimate goal if you're not doing that at the present moment. Because what I'm going to talk about in these goals really has to do with ERP therapy, because that is your best alternative to getting past OCD, is using ERP therapy. And then, like I say, in my practice, what I do is ERP with EFT and mindfulness and all that. And just a quick shout out, there is a great workbook called Mindfulness Workbook for OCD, which really goes into the mindfulness part of it, which is big. And that's what I do in my practice, is really work on the mindfulness part. Underneath the idea of the top goal being ERP therapy, the second kind of top goal would be that we really want to stop the thoughts and compulsions that are happening for the person dealing with OCD. But note that we don't want to start that big, that has to be our immediate goal. We want to start small. We don't want to have to leap too big at the first step, because this is not a what was it it's a marathon, not a sprint, as I think somebody told me, and I think that's a very good thought when it comes to goals, is that you want to make sure that you're not trying to do the sprint. You're not trying to solve this in a month. A lot of times ERP therapy can take 6 months to a year or longer, just depending on the person themselves. So what I always talk about, when you're looking at ERP, the way you really want to start with that, the first thing you do, you want to kind of analyze the situation. And by that I mean, the first thing you want to do is really write down the thoughts, the triggers, and the compulsions that are going on. What are all the different things that happen? Now, understanding too that OCD, I don't say great OCD, the monster of OCD. Let me put it that way. Will change things. If you solve one thing, it will tend to add another, and those will just have to be added in the future. But so you want to sit down with the person that's dealing with OCD. Hopefully they're cooperative in this. If not, the coach, what I call the compassionate coach, and I'll explain that in a little bit, or the parents or the caregivers or whoever is helping the person through the OCD, might be the partner, the wife, whatever. If they don't get cooperation from the person themselves, they themselves can go through and really, they more than likely know the triggers, the thoughts, and the compulsions that a person is going through. That's kind of the first step. Make out a list of all of those things. The second part of this is making out a list for whoever that compassionate coach is, the partner, the parent, caregiver, etc., that is helping this person through OCD. What you want to do is you want to write down what I call the compensations. Some people call them the compulsions that you might be doing that are feeding it also. And let me explain. Compensating, for instance, and I'll use my own personal thing. I've seen this with a lot of clients, but I use my own personal. With my own daughter, she couldn't touch anything at certain points of her OCD. Couldn't touch us, couldn't touch anything. So we would have to bring food out to her on a paper plate. We'd have to bring a box of forks or spoons or knives or whatever she needed. We'd have to carry the box out and let her reach in, grab one fork, and she would use that to eat her dinner and then throw it away. That's compensating, because really that's feeding it. And I understand doing it. And I'll explain what you do to get past that. But again, you're going to make out the thoughts, triggers, and compulsions of the person with OCD himself. And hopefully they cooperate with you and help you do that. In fact, letting them write them down is very helpful. And then making your own list of ways that you might be compensating. And I understand, like I say, compensating late at night by giving in on things is something that is easy to do, but we have to eventually work past those, because that just ends up feeding the OCD. Then what you do on both of those lists is you want, mainly the thoughts, triggers, and compulsions of the person. You really want to rank them from 1 to 10 on how strong they are, how much anxiety they have going with them. And usually I just do a 1 to 10 scale. 1 being no little, absolutely little or none anxiety, to 10, which is extreme anxiety. And the reason you want to rank those is when you get into doing the goals, you want to look at either starting with the number 1 of the 10s, or you want to start with the 1s, and I'll explain what that means. If you start with the low end, with the 2s, the 3s, you may want to do that initially just to let the person see some some results, some awards or whatever you want to call it for doing it and getting something passed, just to give them the feeling of accomplishment with it. And then what I would suggest is going and starting with one of the bigger ones. And you can't, that's one way of doing it. The other way is to start with a 10. Now, understand when you start with a 10, it is the toughest, and it's going to be resisted. And so we started with some of the bigger ones and worked our way. Because what happens as you do the bigger ones, when they get to the smaller ones, they don't have any power to them anymore. So you can do either way, but I would suggest, even if you start out small, to give them some feeling of accomplishment, is that you get to the bigger ones and start working on the bigger ones. So then from there, you're going to want to work on, and trust me, I've never been great at goals. I try to write down kind of a to-do of the year or to-do of the 6 months or something like that. But you want to make sure, of course, they're achievable. You want the person that's suffering with the OCD to be as much a part of making these goals as possible. Now, if they don't, they just refuse to participate in making these goals, then you want to make it clear to them that your intentions are that you're going to be making goals, and these are the goals you're going to have to follow, because they won't agree to be part of it. But it's very important, if they can be part of it, to be part of it. And if initially they don't, but you start working on the ERP, then you can always get their input to change them and modify those goals in the future. You want to be compassionate in what you do. You got to remember who this person is. More than likely, it's a person that you love and care about, and so you want to remember that person's there. So as you work through these goals, you want to do it in a compassionate way, not a military style, but a compassionate. Now, having said that, you want to make sure that, I call it the velvet hand push. You want to be able to gently push them a little past their zone or their box. Take them out of their comfort zone. You want to have firm control, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And I think it's important to have written goals, and then also to track those goals. Now, the goals would be to start out really small. For instance, if touching something, let's say they have trouble touching the doorknob. We'll use that as the example. They have trouble touching the doorknob. Your goal for that, if that's a 10 especially, is the first thing you might want to do is take a picture of that doorknob and literally have them stand and look just at the picture, not the doorknob, but the picture, and see their response to it. Do they rear up? Does the anxiety jump to 10 when they look at that picture? Then you want to have them look at that picture 2-3 times a day, if not, and sit with the feelings. And this is where you have to be kind of firm. You have to insist they do it, but do it compassionately. Come on, with statements like, come on, I know you can do this. We really got to do this. Let's just stand another 5 minutes with it, 10 minutes, and try to get to a point each time that they stay with it until they feel the anxiety go down. And then slowly build towards that. So they may take a couple of times, it may take a week, where they just look at that picture until they can look at the picture without any anxiety, without it raising up. Then they move to the next step, and they may stand across the room and stare at the doorknob and think about touching it. and see where their anxiety goes. Same thing there. And doing that over and over until they can look from a distance at that doorknob. And of course, you just slowly but surely move them closer and closer and closer to that doorknob until they're standing in front of it, and they can stand in front of it thinking about touching it and not have anxiety. And then the next step might be placing a finger, the edge of a finger on the doorknob and holding with. So it is a slow, methodical process or a goal, And I'm not talking, when I talk about going from like looking at the picture to staring at the doorknob and then moving closer, it's not like you jump 10 feet. You may only move 5 feet, 2 feet, whatever that starts to raise them up again, you want to move to that next part. So these goals, again, are ones that you go over and hopefully work with them in setting up. We're going to start working on now. The other thing is don't put too much. You don't want to go for 5 triggers at one time. You might go for 1 or 2, but go for the biggest one. Concentrate and focus on 1, maybe 2. Now, here's the other part of it. One of the reasons I had you write down what you do to compensate, I also wanted you to write that for a reason, because as you go through this, there's going to be resistance on their part. And for instance, I'll use again my own personals. My daughter refused to do the ERP. She refused to do the different steps. And so we knew, we had written down all the compensations that we were doing for her. And we had to give her an ultimatum. You either start working on the steps and we'll continue to compensate, but you have to be working on the different triggers. Or if you don't, we will stop all compensations. And let me tell you, that is the toughest thing for a parent to do. Because what we did, for instance, as I used in the example before, we were having to bring food to her. She was stuck on the couch, so we had to bring food to her with the forks and all that. When she refused, we put lunch, dinner, breakfast on the table with regular utensils, with her drink, and said, your breakfast is there for you if you want it, but that's how you get it. And for us, it took a whole day of her not eating and not eating, where she finally broke down and started doing the steps. And it sounds cruel, and it was the toughest thing. And like I said, I've worked with other clients that had to be firm. Again, be compassionate, but be firm. That's why I call it the velvet hand push. We have to do this thing. Remember who they are. And so as we went through with her, we kept compensating, but she was working on triggers. And at the same time, we were slowly pulling our compensations out and working on them and getting rid of them. And we eventually worked through the whole list where we aren't compensating, and she got past the OCD. And like I said, I've worked with others with this, and it takes time, patience, and support and compassion. And I call those that help them compassionate coaches, because you have to remember who the person is, and that you love them, you care about them. And so you really want to try to do it with compassion. So setting your goals this brand new year, this brand new decade, it is such a neat thing, 2020. I'm just amazed that I've reached this pinnacle myself, because it seems so futuristic, 2020. But I hope, like I said before, that we use this as our vision too, of 2020. We clear our focus and get set on changing this OCD, changing our anxiety, and changing our family, because they're all being affected by it. So I hope this has helped in setting up some goals, figuring out how to get yourself cranked up in the ERP. And if you need help, that's what I do. I help coach people through this ERP process, because it is a very methodical, it takes a lot of patience, it's not easy. It gets easier, but it's not easy to start. So I wish you the best of luck in this new decade and new year, and hope that this has helped you. And if I can help you get through this, I'd be more than happy to do that. So take care now, and thank you. This concludes this podcast. We really would appreciate your comments. Simply leave a comment at www.invisiblewheelchair.com. There, you're able to submit a comment that will help us determine future podcasts. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the podcast, please email don@invisiblewheelchair.com. Remember, there is a corresponding tapping recording for each of the podcasts, with the exception of the interview podcast. You can find these tapping recordings and archive past podcasts at www.invisiblewheelchair.com. Finally, there is relief for OCD, and we at FamilyOCD.com and FocusedHealthyFamily.com can help you find that relief. Again, you can contact us through those sites, FamilyOCD.com or FocusedHealthyFamily.com. You can also find us on Facebook at Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at InvisibleWheel1, that's the number 1, or at FamilyOCD. So thank you for listening. Keep tapping and transcending your life to new heights.